The chronicled history of human conflict and diplomacy is often written in broad strokes, depicting the movement of armies, the rhetoric of leaders, and the execution of grand, sweeping strategies.
Yet, the truest, most terrifying hinges of that history, the moments when global destiny tilted precariously, were decided not on vast, bloody battlefields, but in silent, chilled sanctums, windowless rooms, and the exhausted confines of intelligence stations. These were the junctions where clandestine information, often fragmented, cryptic, or deliberately obscured, was received, interpreted, or fatally dismissed.
The outcome was always binary: global stability or absolute chaos. The difference hinged entirely on a solitary decision, an agonizing moment of analysis, or the simple failure to connect disparate facts vibrating across the radio spectrum. We delve now into 5 such critical intelligence decisions, examinations of moments where the silent machinery of espionage and counter-espionage determined the fate of millions, revealing the razor-thin margin that separates operational success from catastrophic failure. The first junction is defined by absence, the unread warning. It is the examination of a profound systemic failure that occurred in the tense, final hours preceding a catastrophic surprise attack that plunged a nation into total war. The setting is tropical, humid, heavy with the oppressive pre-dawn air. Picture the intelligence stations, scattered huts and concrete bunkers located near the coastlines or deep within administrative buildings, insulated only marginally against the relentless heat. Inside these stations, the light is dim, sickly yellow, cast by naked bulbs hanging low over work tables. The air, thick and motionless, carries the pervasive metallic tang of old electricity and the faint, sweet smell of stale tobacco. Analysts, many draped in sweat-dampened linen shirts, hunched over their positions, their eyes burning from countless hours of sustained focus. The primary sound is a ceaseless, chaotic symphony of radio static, the raw, unfiltered voice of the ether. Thousands of miles away, the enemy fleet was sailing towards its target, maintaining absolute radio silence. But the ancillary systems, the supply ships, the coastal reporting stations, the high command communications chatter, these signals did not cease. They pulsed across the airwaves, captured by antennas designed to devour every scrap of electromagnetic noise. The raw intake of data was staggering. Teleprinters, bulky machines with keys stained gray by continuous use, clattered erratically, spitting out rolls of thin, brittle paper onto the dusty concrete floors. These strips contained fragmented, coded intercepts, cryptic weather reports that sounded eerily specific to certain operational zones, abrupt shifts in the patrol patterns of distant reconnaissance aircraft, and unusual traffic spikes on communication channels that had previously been dormant. The problem was not a lack of warning, but an excess of noise. The intelligence community, operating under established bureaucratic divisions and hampered by archaic sharing protocols, was drowning in information. The intercepts were scattered among multiple agencies. Naval intelligence received the ship tracking data. Signal Corps handled the logistical traffic. Army intelligence analyzed ground deployment patterns. No central clearinghouse possessed the requisite authority or framework to compile the mountain of individual data points into a cohesive, terrifying topographic map. An analyst might be sitting at a worn wooden desk, painstakingly translating a 2-word message describing a change in the fuel oil requisition schedule for a distant port, a fact that by itself seems utterly trivial. Miles away, a cryptographer might be staring at a piece of paper, trying to decipher a strange instruction concerning the timing of a major communications blackout, a fact that, isolated, seems like routine security protocol. Neither individual possessed the context of the other's finding. They were holding fragments of the same shattered mirror, unable to see the terrifying image it collectively reflected.
The cost of this failure in synthesis was immeasurable.
The crucial signals, the specific language used to describe the air group movements, the confirmation of the radio call signs switching to operational mode, the final, desperate transmission reporting an inbound formation were all received. They were logged, filed, and physically stacked high on desks, creating unstable, paper-based monuments to impending doom. But they remained uselessly disconnected, existing as discrete, meaningless dots in an ocean of routine administrative traffic. When the attack finally arrived in the shimmering heat of the morning, it was received with shock, not because the necessary information was unavailable, but because the structure required to interpret imminent danger was structurally blind. The tragedy of the unread warning is that the destiny of the nation was decided by inertia and bureaucratic friction, proving that the greatest threat to intelligence is not the cunning of the enemy, but the inability of the system to connect two slips of paper sitting 30 feet apart. The failure was a cognitive one, a failure to visualize the unseen, coordinated threat hiding in plain sight within the chaotic flood of radio noise. The second critical junction presents a mirror image of the first, the calculated deception. This was not a failure of synthesis, but a masterful execution of fabrication, a deliberate, meticulously constructed lie designed to draw enemy focus away from the most crucial, vulnerable phase of the largest amphibious assault in human history. It was a victory achieved entirely through psychological manipulation and the strategic placement of ghosts. This decision unfolded far from the front lines, within the sterile, high-ceilinged war rooms of counterintelligence headquarters. The atmosphere was tight, highly controlled, and permeated by an intense intellectual focus. Operational maps dominated the walls, immense sheets of parchment pinned taut against corkboards. These maps were not just visual aids, they were the canvases for the deception. The air in the room was cool, conditioned to preserve the integrity of the paperwork, carrying the dusty, mineral scent of fresh chalk and graphite. Analysts, dressed in slightly rumpled, heavy uniforms, worked at massive oak tables. Their tools were simple yet profound: colored pencils, rulers, protractors, and small brushes, used to dust chalk and eraser shavings from the complex matrices laid out before them. The objective was to convince the enemy that the main invasion force would land hundreds of miles away from its actual target. To achieve this, an entire phantom army had to be manufactured, complete with fictitious commanders, genuine-sounding logistical problems, and an operational tempo that was utterly convincing. This was psychological warfare, waged not with bullets, but with meticulously managed radio waves. The central component of the deception was radio trickery. Specialist units, often located miles from any actual military concentration, were tasked with transmitting the operational heartbeat of a massive, non-existent force. They employed sophisticated radio netting techniques, varying the power and direction of their transmissions. Using authentic operating procedures and call signs, all designed to simulate the dense, organized chatter of a genuine army preparing for deployment. Consider the detailed sensory orchestration. The enemy's long-range listening posts would intercept what appeared to be a genuine signal concerning the movement of a motorized brigade. An intelligence operative, using a carefully calibrated signal strength, would transmit a message detailing a fake supply shortage of a specific type of fuel. Using the precise, slightly annoyed bureaucratic language common to frontline logistics. This wasn't merely noise, it was structured, believable life. The transmission would originate from a location hundreds of miles north of the real staging areas, creating a physical signature that the enemy could geolocate. The analysts in the war room, reviewing enemy intercepts, would then scrutinize their own phantom output, searching for subtle flaws in the lie. Was the fictional commander's message too precise?
Was the radio operator's touch on the key too clean, too practiced?
If the enemy sensed perfection, they might suspect artifice. The deception required slight imperfections, the realistic clutter of a genuine large-scale deployment. Operational maps were constantly smeared with the chalk dust of hypothetical movements. A pencil line would sweep across the board, denoting the supposed route of a fabricated armored division. These maps were sometimes deliberately exposed or even allowed to fall into the hands of double agents, ensuring the enemy received physical confirmation of the electronic ghost they were tracking. The final act of interpretation lay with the enemy's intelligence apparatus. The success of the calculated deception hinged entirely on the enemy analysts making the wrong critical decision, the decision to believe the phantom evidence over the scattered, real indicators. The sheer volume and consistency of the fabricated radio traffic, combined with aerial reconnaissance intentionally designed to show empty tents and dummy landing craft, created an irresistible narrative pressure. When the real landing commenced, massive enemy forces, including crucial armored reserves, were positioned hundreds of miles away, rigidly held in place, awaiting the arrival of an army that existed only as a sequence of meticulously crafted radio pulses and chalk marks on a map. The calculated deception, a purely intellectual maneuver, had successfully diverted the course of history, demonstrating that sometimes the most decisive intelligence act is not finding the truth, but expertly planting a lie. The third pivot point reveals the sudden, terrifying power of perfect clarity, the cipher breakthrough. This decision revolved around unlocking the deepest secrets of an enemy's command structure, transforming a conflict by suddenly exposing the intent, capability, and timetable of the opposition's every move. The stakes were immediate and operational, measured in the lives saved by preventing ambushes and preempting supply disruptions. The environment of the decryption facility was claustrophobic and utilitarian, located deep underground, shielded from external interference. The air was perpetually dry and hot, laden with the faint, warm smell of heated wire insulation and mineral oil. This heat emanated primarily from the banks of complex electromechanical devices, captured foreign technology, and bespoke calculating machines that filled the room, which were the operational heart of the facility. They were illuminated by the relentless, mesmerizing glow of thousands of vacuum tubes. Each tube pulsed with an amber or reddish light, flickering and humming, contributing to the persistent low-frequency drone that dominated the atmosphere. The light cast long, shifting shadows across the cramped workspaces, creating a perpetually unsettling visual environment. The analysts and cryptographers lived in this hum. They were often isolated, working in shifts that obliterated the concept of day or night. Their tools were basic but essential: log tables, endless stacks of perforated punch cards, and pencil stubs worn down to the brass ferrule. For months, the incoming enemy communication, thousands of intercepts detailing troop movements, naval orders, and strategic intentions, had been nothing more than jumbled, meaningless sequences of letters or numbers. The raw data felt heavy, opaque, refusing to yield its inner structure. Analysts wrestled with frequency analysis, patterns of repetition, and the psychological habits of the enemy cipher clerks. The work was grinding, frustrating, defined by endless failed permutations. Then came the moment of the breakthrough. It was rarely dramatic, often marked by the weary recognition of a repeated structural error or the sudden intuitive realization of a previously masked starting point. In the flickering light of the vacuum tubes, a cryptographer might isolate a specific three-letter sequence, realizing it corresponds not to a complex code element, but simply to the enemy's standard administrative prefix for request acknowledged. Once this initial key was turned, the floodgates opened. The opaque noise transformed instantly into a blinding, terrifying clarity. The scrambled transmissions ceased to be noise and became perfectly structured, chillingly precise military orders. The weight of the world shifted from the burden of the unknown to the terrifying burden of knowing too much. The raw physical sensation of this transition was acute. The printed tapes coming off the teletype machines no longer contained randomized characters. They detailed in plain language the coordinates of an impending submarine attack or the precise route of a crucial enemy resupply convoy. The analysts handling this information experienced a cognitive whiplash, the shift from academic puzzle solving to becoming the immediate keepers of actionable life and death intelligence. The decisions stemming from the cipher breakthrough were often tactical, but their aggregate effect changed the entire strategic calculus of the war. Knowing the enemy's location and intent allowed friendly forces to suddenly materialize at critical junctures, turning predicted victories into costly defeats for the enemy, and transforming planned ambushes into sudden, fatal traps for the aggressors. The operational challenge shifted from decryption to secrecy management. The intelligence derived from the breakthrough had to be disseminated carefully, masked by plausible deniability. Commanders in the field could not suddenly appear omniscient. They had to order reconnaissance flights or reposition assets based on lucky guesses or unusually accurate local reconnaissance.
The sheer volume of life-saving information had to be rationed and filtered, ensuring that the enemy never suspected the true source of the sudden, devastating intelligence advantage.
This facility, lit by the hypnotic glow of outdated technology, was where the intellectual power of analysis demonstrated its capacity to rewrite the rules of modern warfare, providing a terrifying, sudden clarity that saved countless lives, but burdened its keepers with unimaginable operational stress. Our fourth critical junction takes us into the tense, hyper-rational environment of the Cold War, where the stakes escalated dramatically from tactical advantage to potential global annihilation. The satellite glimpse. This moment occurred in a windowless command center deep beneath the Earth, a place engineered for survival in the aftermath of planetary conflict. The atmosphere in the center was heavy, pressurized by the constant proximity to existential threat. The room was saturated with the smell of old paper, ozone from the central display systems, and the pervasive, acrid scent of burnt coffee, perpetually brewing and often reheated on hot plates that provided the only localized warmth. Everything was designed for function and speed. The focal point of the room was a large, heavy conference table, highly polished and slightly scarred by years of briefings, ringed by banks of communication equipment, heavy black and red telephones designed for secure, instantaneous communication. Above, monitors displayed evolving threat matrices, but all attention was centered on a single projected image on a large screen, a grainy, monochromatic aerial photograph. This photograph, captured by a high-altitude reconnaissance platform that had spent agonizing weeks circling a hostile territory, was the hinge of global peace. It showed a newly constructed installation in a remote, unexpected location. The resolution was marginal, the contrast was high, emphasizing deep shadows and bright sun glare. The entire interpretation of the image depended on scale, context, and the ability to differentiate mundane construction from strategic weapons deployment. The analysts, military staff, and high-level decision-makers huddled around the table, their faces pale under the relentless artificial fluorescent light. The conversation was conducted in sharp, low-volume pronouncements, every syllable loaded with geopolitical weight. The image presented a series of freshly excavated trenches, cement pads, and what appeared to be large, tarp-covered vehicles. The critical decision, the glimpse, was interpreting the nature of these objects. Was the enemy building a simple coastal defense battery, a training camp, or, most terrifyingly, a site capable of launching intermediate-range strategic missiles. An analyst, using nothing more than a magnifying glass and specialized tools to measure shadows and relative distances, pointed to a specific rectangular shape. The size ratios are consistent with the known transportation dimensions for the SS-4 payload casing, one voice might assert, dry and technical. Another would counter, but the structural supports on the pads are too light. They suggest mobile launchers, perhaps, not the hardened infrastructure required for long-term strategic readiness. It could be a feint. The tension was agonizing. Every square millimeter of that grainy photo represented an investment of intelligence resources, a projection of military intent, and the potential trigger for irreversible escalation. The decision to label the site as strategic missile deployment versus standard field infrastructure meant the difference between sending naval quarantines, escalating diplomatic rhetoric, or initiating counter-mobilization procedures. The weight of the decision rested on minute details, the specific texture of the soil displacement, the depth and angle of shadows cast by what might be service towers. The faint track marks suggesting the heavy transport required for nuclear payloads. The analysts had to make an objective call, separating the enemy's deliberate attempts at camouflage and obfuscation from the true physical requirements of their weaponry. The final interpretation, the decision that mobilized global counter-response, hinged on a single shared moment of cognitive conviction based on pattern recognition and technical expertise. They identified features that, when viewed against all available supporting intelligence, including low-level human sources and intercepted logistical orders, made the existence of offensive nuclear capability in that location mathematically probable. The decision to accept the glimpse as definitive evidence transformed a tense diplomatic standoff into a global crisis, pushing the world to the edge of nuclear exchange. It proved that in the age of intercontinental threat, the destiny of nations could be decided by the clarity of a single, poorly resolved photograph and the courage of the analysts to trust their reading of shadows. The final critical decision transcends the specific geographies and technologies of past conflicts, presenting the defining challenge of modern intelligence, the data deluge. We move from the chilled bunkers and analog signal rooms to the sterile, dizzying reality of the digital espionage landscape. The setting is a massive server farm, a cool, meticulously engineered environment built to house the accumulated knowledge and communication of the world. The lighting is harsh, clean white, reflecting off polished industrial floors and the towering black facades of countless server racks. The pervasive, deafening sound is the continuous, high-pitched whine of thousands of cooling fans, working tirelessly to manage the staggering heat generated by petabytes of data traffic. The air is cool, dry, and carries the faint, sterile scent of filtered air and fresh plastic. The intelligence officers and analysts here do not listen for static or decode analog intercepts. They navigate overwhelming oceans of digital information, the complete, unfiltered flow of global electronic communication. Their environment is virtual, existing on multiple high-resolution monitors that displayed torrents of raw metadata, complex network topology maps, and constantly updating threat visualization graphs. The problem, unlike the unread warning, is not fragmentation across bureaucracy, but dilution within infinity. Every transaction, every financial record, every private message, every search query, every GPS coordinate, and every automated sensor reading contributes to a global, continuous flood of digital noise. The critical signal, the singular indicator of an impending threat, such as a planned cyber attack on critical infrastructure or the coordination of a decentralized terror cell, is hidden within trillions of irrelevant data points. The modern intelligence decision is not about deciphering a code or interpreting a shadow. It is about algorithmically isolating one critical frequency of intent from the rest of universal static.
The analyst, seated in a high-backed ergonomic chair, is essentially a computational shepherd, overseeing vast arrays of automated sorting and anomaly detection programs.
These programs are the first line of defense, designed to flag deviations from established norms. Unusual spikes in encrypted communications between disparate geographic locations. Sudden, anomalous financial transfers. Or the highly specific search patterns of individuals researching prohibited materials or techniques. The deluge means that the analyst receives not one critical signal per day, but potentially thousands of false positives and ambiguous indicators every hour. The pressure mounts not from a lack of information, but from the inability to prioritize the true threat amidst the computationally generated clutter. Every flagged anomaly is a potential crisis, and dismissing a genuine signal as mere noise carries the catastrophic implications of systemic failure. Consider the challenge. A threat actor might hide their coordination within the parameters of a legitimate commercial exchange, or mask their movements using the sophisticated routing of standard corporate network infrastructure. The critical signal might look identical to the digital footprint of a logistics company tracking a shipment, or a casual exchange about a sporting event. The decision hinges on the human factor, the analyst's capacity to apply complex contextual understanding to the output of machine learning. The analyst must decide when a chain of 5 seemingly random low-level indicators, a small foreign cash transfer, a specific type of software purchase, a communication link established via a highly unusual proxy server chain, a plane ticket purchased for cash, and a highly specific keyword search, coalesce into a recognizable signature of coordinated hostile action. This is the ultimate test of intelligence interpretation, separating correlation from causation and probability from certainty in a hyper-complex, constantly shifting virtual environment. The stakes are immense, as the modern threats are often decentralized, fast-moving, and capable of inflicting widespread societal damage through pure network disruption. The constant battle in the server farm is not against the enemy's encryption, which is often trivial to break given time and resources, but against the enemy's capacity to blend seamlessly into the texture of normal, overwhelming global digital life. The decision to elevate one flickering data point from the ocean of noise into a confirmed, actionable threat is a monumental act of intellectual courage, demonstrating the continuing, terrifying power of a single analysis in defining global security in the 21st century. These 5 critical junctions, spanning decades and technological epochs, reveal a fundamental truth about intelligence. The margin between global stability and absolute chaos is razor thin, and consistently resides in the realm of interpretation. Whether dealing with humid, fragmented radio intercepts, meticulously constructed theatrical deceptions, the sudden, brilliant clarity of a cipher breakthrough, the heavy geopolitical weight of a grainy photograph, or the algorithmic challenge of isolating a single signal from the modern digital deluge, the essential dynamic remains unchanged. Intelligence is not merely the collection of facts. It is the art of assigning meaning to the meaningless. It is the ability to visualize the unmanifested threat, to see the army that doesn't exist, to hear the order that hasn't been spoken, or to recognize the missile deployment hidden within a shadow. The analysts in these silent rooms, surrounded by paper, chalk dust, humming machinery, or cooling fans, are the unseen custodians of history, making decisions that, while often anonymous, consistently determine the trajectory of human events. Their constant struggle is to manage the pressure of imperfect information, knowing that a single misplaced or missed interpretation can, and often nearly has, changed everything.